We're live? Okay, thanks. All right, hey everyone. We're a bit ahead of 2 o'clock. We thought we'd kick off early and allow people to join. This is the second MyHR Facebook Live session. So last one was a success. So we will now be doing these monthly, and each month we'll have a new topic for you. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about recruitment, and I'll give you a rundown on the content of today's session in a moment. But before we do that, I was going to just address a couple of questions from last time. So last time, if you were there, you might recall that we dealt with trial periods and managing trial periods and trial period exits. I've had a couple of questions since, and I think this is probably going to happen on a monthly basis, people who might not be comfortable asking questions in a public forum. So feel free to email me directly afterwards. My email address is jason@myhr.co.nz. Or you can call our office. If you're in New Zealand, it's 0800 694769. So feel free to ask questions. 2 questions from last month that I will deal with before we jump into the recruitment session is, one was about extending trial periods. And we did cover this in the Facebook Live session, but it was a question that was asked just for clarity about can we extend a trial period beyond 90 days, particularly if somebody is sick, for example. And the answer is pretty unequivocal on this, and it is no, you can't. There's no circumstance under which you can extend a trial period beyond 90 days. The law is quite explicit about that. It is a 90-day trial period, and it is 90 calendar days from the employee's first day of work. If you have agreed leave in advance, let's say they are taking a month off for a pre-arranged holiday, that month is included in the 90-day trial period. So yeah, if they're sick a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, that does not allow you to run the trial period on by that same period of time. So it's a pretty simple question to answer, and there's no circumstance under which 90 days can become anything other than 90 days. So just be aware of that. Very good question, and something that often trips people up. The second question we got was around signing the employment agreement before the employee starts and how much is enough time to allow them. And you might recall we discussed the issue of giving the employee time to review the employment agreement, seek advice and ask questions before signing it. Best practice is, and just to be clear, the law doesn't actually say, there's not a section in the Act that says you must give an employee X number of days. It is all about what is fair and reasonable, and the employee must be given a reasonable opportunity to seek advice, ask questions, and ask questions before signing any employment agreement. Particularly important because a trial period is actually what we call a voluntary clause. The 90-day trial period doesn't automatically apply by law. The 90-day trial period only applies if it's written into the employment agreement, which means an employee is able to negotiate around the 90-day trial period if they like. So best practice, we always advise our clients to give it a week. So if you want somebody to start on Monday, the Monday prior, you should be issuing an employment agreement to them. Often that's fine because people will have a 1 week, a 2 week, or maybe a 1 month notice period, and they won't hand in their notice until they get the new agreement. So that should give you time. In some industries, we find it's fast paced. You interview someone today, you want them to start tomorrow, and that's the reality of the working environment. If you do that, be aware that it would be very hard to enforce a trial period. So a week is best practice. 2 business days is acceptable, but again, we advise that is 2 days within a working week. That doesn't include a weekend. So you're not issuing an employment agreement at 5 o'clock on a Friday for an employee to start at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. I mean, this is all around this ability for the employee to review the agreement before signing it. This does cause some issues and contention amongst employers who want to move quickly and secure a person. If you have any concerns about it, as I said, stay in touch. So that's the wrap up of last month's on trial period. How are we going for time? Should we?
Yeah, so pretty much.
Almost 2 o'clock. Yeah. So I think we'll kick into the recruitment session and roll it from here. As with last month, along the way you're able to ask questions. I've got someone with me in the room today who's going to read the questions out when they get asked so we can answer them as we go. And as I said earlier, if you're not comfortable asking questions in the public forum, you can always email me afterwards at jason@myhr.co.nz or call the office. If you're in New Zealand, it's 0800 694769. We'd love to hear from you. So today's session's about recruitment, and recruitment's a really hot topic because lots of people are looking, and there are some serious skill shortages in New Zealand at the moment in some key professions, and it's been the subject of all sorts of debates, particularly given we're in an election year. It covers immigration policy, it covers a range of things. Today's session, what I've decided to do is focus on, I guess, what we would call a traditional recruitment process. And I'm doing this really as an acknowledgement that most employers still follow this traditional process, and that is place an ad, screen some CVs, interview a candidate or two, do a reference check or three, and offer them the job. Now, there are other ways and other things you can do. There's applicant tracking software, sorting and screening software, psychometric testing. There are a range of new and quite interesting and exciting tools for attracting candidates, making use of LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. I'm not going to delve too much into the new and innovative stuff in this session. That will be a subject of a later Facebook Live. Today is really an acknowledgement that for most people, the old school way of recruiting is still the way they recruit. So what I want to do is give you some tips on, if you insist on using this traditional method of recruiting, how you get the best out of it. And I've divided it up into what I call the 10 tips for practical recruitment. We will follow this session with a resource that will also be available on our website. That's myhr.co.nz. So 10 tips for good quality practical recruitment using the traditional methodology of advertising, interviewing and reference checking. First thing I'd say is when you enter this, given the market and given what we're dealing with, there are two things around what I call a recruitment mindset that I recommend all my clients adopt. And one is that you just accept that recruitment takes work. And I think many of you get that. But for a lot of people, there is a bit of I'm just going to chuck an ad up on a job board somewhere online and, might get around to replying to the candidates in 2 weeks or a month's time. And then I forget that I have an interview, and so I don't quite have the interview questions organised and that sort of thing. It becomes almost this add-on to the day. If you are recruiting for any role, you need to accept that it is a job in and of itself. It takes work, it takes effort. Be prepared to put the work in because you'll get better results. The second thing is I advise people to try and be in the market continuously. Always be on the lookout for good talent. If you are in a role, if you own a business, if you're a manager where you are recruiting or may recruit in the future, it can't hurt to have a database of candidates or contacts, whether that's through LinkedIn or whether that's traditional business cards in your drawer or whether it's just a contact in your phone. If you've met someone who you think is particularly good and who may be able to work for you in the future, why not make contact? It's pretty gratifying, and I speak from experience actually, when you get to offer a candidate a job without even advertising the job because you know they're the right person for it. You've been speaking to them for a year or so, and when the role comes up, they're there. It saves a lot of time and a lot of money, so always be on the lookout. Those are two things, just general tips and what I call a recruitment mindset. In terms of then the steps of recruitment, these 10 steps to the traditional recruitment process I talk about, the first one starts actually before you even get into the market. And step one is define the job clearly. It's amazing how many times I see people commence their recruitment process and define the job as they start interviewing people. Figure out that actually what they might have advertised for is not the job that they want, that they're meeting candidates in the market that are giving them a bit of a feel for what they really need, or that their remuneration expectations are much higher than what the company was prepared to pay. And that sort of thing stems from the company not really defining the job before you get to market. And that also should happen when you replace somebody. Just because somebody has resigned and you have a vacancy doesn't necessarily mean the replacement is going to be exactly the same. Particularly if that person's worked for you for a few years, what you've got in the old job description from 3 years ago may not actually be what that person is doing today. And in fact, what you're doing today may not be what you need tomorrow. So take some time to think about what you need. What is the job that you are about to recruit for? Because once you know that and you can define it with a really clear and succinct job description, you can then do some remuneration benchmarking, figure out what the market is paying for this job and if you're prepared to pay that. It helps enormously when you know that as you enter into the market. If you have somebody who's well above what you would be prepared to pay for the position, then they might be good at what they do, but they won't be right for your job, for example. So you don't get caught up in a back foot pay negotiation when actually what you're trying to do is find the best person for the job. So please, step one, before you even think about advertising or going to look, define the job. Be really clear on what it is you want, what the job should achieve. Once you've got that, step two is write a short and clear ad. concise. This is a marketing tool, right? Long-winded, fluffy advertisements that are basically a 3-page job description, top and tailed with a send me your CV and we're a great place to work, are really not that effective. Advertising and things move so quickly now that you really need something that is punchy and that captures what you are looking for and will attract and interest candidates in applying. It should speak like your company speaks. So, for example, if you're quite a traditional conservative company, don't get wacky and write a crazy ad. But equally, if you're a little more relaxed in your environment, write an ad that reflects that. And then place it wisely. Yeah, so it may not be some of the traditional channels that you used to. Make use of social media. But in some cases, it's not always online either. In some industries, there are still print publications that circulate the industry widely, that are read by people within that industry, and that will target the sorts of people you are interested in. So be really careful about where you put the job and make sure it's going to get the right level of candidate and the right type of candidate. The other thing, of course, is if we go back to step 1, if you've defined the job clearly and you know what you want, it's going to make it way easier to write a good, punchy advertisement. And then off it goes. Share it too with everyone you know. Ask them if they know anyone that's looking for work doing what it is that you're advertising for. So then step 3 to this 10-step process. The CVs start to roll in, hopefully. If they don't, we may have to start the process again, but let's assume for now that you are getting CVs in. The review of the CV to get to a shortlist is an interesting stage because really a CV doesn't tell you very much at all. You have no way of verifying if the CV has been completed and designed and developed by the person. They may have got somebody to do it for them. At this stage, you also have no real way of verifying if what they've said on the CV is complete and accurate. So you're relying heavily on good faith and honesty, and most people are. But any CVs that you get in, you should cross-reference against LinkedIn profiles. Some people will just send you their LinkedIn profile. I think that's perfectly fine. There's that new feature now with LinkedIn that allows you to just print it as a PDF, and there you have the CV. In terms of, I guess, the pros and cons of CV, if a CV is well formatted, no grammatical errors, and appears to target the criteria for your job, that's enough to move it to the yes pile, if you like, for the next stage of the shortlist. If it doesn't, discard it. Even if someone has got their graphic designer brother to go and do a CV for them, at least they've taken the effort to do something about it. Any CV that turns up with spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, is poorly formatted, looks bad, or a LinkedIn profile that doesn't really sort of string together particularly well, often there's just no point in wasting your time. So make a really quick yes-no sort pile. People like to have another pile for maybes. I'll always say put the maybes into the no pile and move on with those that are definite yeses. Move through this stage quickly is my advice. Don't agonise over CVs. So once you've got your shortlist and you're getting ready to meet your people, when you invite them in for their interview, your shortlist of candidates, maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 2, maybe it's only 1. If you didn't get many apply, that doesn't necessarily matter. I always like, no matter really what the job is, that when they come in for interview, one of the first things they do is complete a basic application form. And there's a reason for this, and that is that it just picks up a lot of the compliance-based stuff that you don't really need to ask in the interview, and it captures some really important information. Right to work in New Zealand, any health concerns that may affect their ability to do the job safely, a request for criminal convictions if you need that, consent for pre-employment drug testing if you need that, and it's a really basic sort of comprehension test. Can they read and write reasonably well, and are the things that they're putting on the application form supported by their CV? Gives you an indication pretty quickly if what they've put in their CV or on their LinkedIn profile is in fact true. So the application form is very simple, and it's actually also, I find, a bit of an icebreaker. People are nervous at recruitment, and people always talk about candidates being nervous, but in my experience a lot of managers and business owners also get nervous, and it's not often talked about. But you're not professional recruiters, right? And so you want to make sure you get the best person for the job, and I see this a lot. Managers getting very, very nervous before they go into an interview. So the person turns up, you say hello, you shake their hand, you put them in the room, you give them the application form and a glass of water, go and photocopy their CV if you don't have it online, if they've brought paper in, maybe a copy of their work visa or driver's licence, and give them 10 minutes in the room to fill out the application form. like I say, it's quite a nice icebreaker, and it picks up some of that basic compliance stuff, those questions that you need answered that you don't necessarily need to cover in the interview. So step 5, we're halfway through now. This is about the interview. Interviews are classic. They are still the most common way that people use to recruit, and they are notoriously ineffective. Interviewing is a skill on its own. You can be a great interviewer and you can be terrible at the job that you are interviewing for. Vice versa, you might be the best person for the job and you may perform awfully badly at an interview. Ironically, some people who are very good at interviews are good because they do lots of them, which means they're often in the job market, which may not be the sign of a good candidate. But nevertheless, an interview is an opportunity to get in front of the candidate, to sit down and talk to people, to give them an opportunity to explain themselves and for you to get to know them a little bit. So with all this in mind, and knowing that interviews are not particularly effective, we still find most people do it. So how are you going to get the best out of an interview? Point 1 is please shut up. Okay? Don't talk too much. Ask questions and then let the candidate talk. They will relax as the interview goes on. It's not about tricking people, it's just about creating a relaxed environment and getting some feedback. It's classic when you're in an interview with a passionate business owner or manager and they spend the first 30 minutes just telling the candidate everything about the job, about the company, about their vision, about their life, about what they're into, about who they'd like to hire, and then turn around and look at the person over the table and go, is that you? And of course they're going to say, yeah, it is me. So let the candidate talk. That's what they're there for. They should, in my view, do 80% of the talking right through, and at the very end then they can ask you some questions and you can talk to them. Interviewing these days is far more two-way, and it should be two-way, right? You are selecting the best person for the job, they are selecting whether or not you're a person they want to work for. And that's the reality of it. And if you get an employment relationship that is commencing on the basis of a bit of mutual respect, it's far better. So gone are the days where the employer has, I guess, all the power and authority, and people should just feel grateful to have a job. Candidates typically have a few options now. So certainly at the end, there's that time where you get to pitch your company to them. But for the bulk of the first part of the interview, you are listening to them. So that's sort of tip number 1 around the interview process. The second thing is have set and structured questions that you ask each candidate. So if you interview 3 people, you've asked them all the same thing, and it's much easier to benchmark all 3 of them against those criteria. Have an interview flow that is informal at the start, sort of icebreaker, gets people relaxed and gets over that hurdle of this interviewing being a skill. So a candidate who is naturally nervous will be a little more relaxed as you get into it. I like using some of those behavioural questions, the ones everyone hates. Give me an example of when you did ABC. And the reason I like that is it just gives the candidate an opportunity to talk about things in their context. And there's plenty of theory around whether or not past behaviour is a determiner of future behaviour, but as a conversation piece, I think it's quite interesting, and it's good to have those questions in there. One of the other things at interviews that some of our clients like to do is a work test, and we talked a little bit about work testing in the last Facebook Live session and what it might do to invalidate a trial period. There's an interesting piece of case law, a company called Salad Bowl, and they had a person come in and do a work test, but it was deemed that she was in fact employed. So when they didn't offer the job, she took a grievance for unfair dismissal and was successful. So be cautious about work tests, but they can be very valuable. An area that we find they're particularly useful is in hospitality, recruiting a barista, for example, get them to make some coffees. The key around this is that you make sure that the work that they're doing is not work that you derive any commercial benefit from, or not work that it would have been done, otherwise being done by a paid employee. So make a couple of coffees for each other, go and have a coffee as part of the interview. Don't serve customers behind the counter as part of the work test. That may be deemed to be employment. So good structured interviews, asking everyone the same questions, gives you a decent framework in which to compare and contrast. At this point, there are other options too around psychometric testing, aptitude testing, and we're not going to go into that here because, again, many of our clients just roll through this piece and want to get straight to the reference check for the candidate that they prefer. So reference checks, what are they all about? This is now tip number 6. Reference checks are interesting. Most of the time, you would expect the referee names that you were given are people that are going to say great things about the candidate, right? Why would you why would you give the name of somebody that clearly doesn't like you? So be realistic in your expectations around what you're going to get from a reference check. I think 2 is a minimum, 3 is ideal. And it's not a case of, do you think I should hire this person, or are they good, yes or no? Really what you're seeking from a reference check is information about the candidate that supplements what you've already learnt. What you've learnt through their completion of the application form, through the interview process, from reading their CV, what you know about them already. And so a reference check really covers a range of things. Talk a little bit with the referee about the things that the candidate was particularly good at. It's always a great place to start, because referees like to feel like they're saying good things about the candidate. And then talk about some of their development areas and just learn a little bit about some of the things that they might need help with from a training point of view. You're not asking the referee to sell out their mate or their ex-employee, but you're just getting a bit of an insight about their strengths and weaknesses as an example. Keep in mind it's someone's opinion as well, and it's doing a job in a company that you may have no idea of how it operated. So take it with a grain of salt and balance it against the information you already have. Good reference checks should support the things you've already learnt or highlight some of the issues that you may be concerned about. So at this point, you've probably got, if you haven't already, what a lot of people call a gut feel about the candidate. And the amount of times I hear this, people go, oh yeah, I just trust my gut, I've been recruiting for years and I always get it right. I'm sorry, but your gut feel isn't really some kind of spiritual insight. The Force or the Jedi Masters have delivered to you, right? It is informed by a range of things: your personal bias, your personal preferences, your history, growing up, you name it. There's quite a bit going on there, and what your gut is telling you is just a reaction to the things you've already seen and learnt from the candidate. So understanding that your gut feel is a genuine feeling coming from somewhere, acknowledge it, figure out where it's coming from and whether it's valid or not. If your gut feel is telling you that you're not quite sure about this candidate despite the fact they're ticking all the boxes, get someone else to interview them. Because that person may not carry the same social bias or social views that you do. They may have a different perspective and they may be able to pick up on it. Your gut feel may in fact turn out to be something quite legitimate. And you highlight that as you go through the process. Or your gut feel may prove to be completely irrelevant and something that is based more on your personality than anything else. So a second interviewer at this point can be quite handy. And this is one of the areas that testing, psychometric and aptitude testing, can help, because it helps you get away from that. So you've done your reference checks now, and you have gathered as much information as the traditional recruitment process really allows. You've got a bunch of info, notes and opinions about the candidate, and you're ready, you think, to hire the right person. So steps 7, 8 and 9 really focus on, I consider them part of the recruitment process, but it's the commencement of employment. So the next step after that reference check is to develop a good and legally robust employment agreement. And it might sound kind of obvious, right? But it's incredible how many employers we find don't do this, or they don't issue it until a month after the person is employed, or the agreement is a template that's been recycled from 4 years ago and it references old legislation or whatever it may be. Develop a good employment agreement, and not only does this create a good legal foundation for the employment relationship and protect you, it also presents professionally. It shows that you're an organisation with half a clue that actually this is a good place to work, that we can get it together to write you a decent letter and provide a document that shows that we are going to pay you and pay you on time and protect your employment as much as we can. It's a great way to facilitate an early engagement opportunity with the candidate, to connect with them in a way that says, yeah, we're really keen for you to start, right? We're looking forward to it, and here it is. Then the next step is issue it before they start. And so I mentioned that before. We see businesses that maybe 2 weeks go by and they haven't, and that's really unsettling for a new candidate, right? So at this point, they're still kind of figuring out if they've made the right decision in coming to work for you. They've been there 2 weeks, they don't have an employment agreement or a contract, as a lot of people refer to them as, and they're wondering if it's going to come, if it will contain terms that they're actually interested in, if there's going to be any sort of fishhooks in there. It can be quite an unsettling and disengaging process. So issue it before they start. The other reason for that, of course, is the trial period, as you know from our last session, is not valid if you haven't issued the employment agreement before the employee starts. And I guess I want to make it really clear that the trial period is not something that I would ever advocate as part of the recruitment process. And there's some critics of the trial period that have suggested that Kiwi employers have a sort of 89-day hiring cycle, and they lay everyone off on day 89 and hire people again. I've got to be honest, I've seen no evidence of that whatsoever, particularly not amongst the people we deal with. We wrote about 12,500 employment agreements over the last couple of years, and the percentage of people that are let go in the trial period is incredibly low. And I think anyone out there can rationally understand that. This idea that you need to be in the market or would want to be in the recruitment market every 3 months is crazy. Recruitment is hard work and difficult. So when you get someone, you want to keep them. You don't want to be flicking them. Having said that, the trial period is your ultimate safety net. If you've gone through all of those steps, application form, reference check, CV screen, interview questions and what have you, and you've just got it wrong, there's a disconnect for some reason, the person you've hired is not the right person, or there are issues that you hadn't previously identified, the trial period gives you that opportunity within the first 90 days to call time and to go back to some of the other candidates that you might have met through the recruitment process. But you can only do that if you have this good employment agreement that you've issued before the person starts. So they were steps 7 and 8. So the last two, which links to them really, step 9 is develop a good induction plan and follow it. And partly this is about that 90-day trial period assessment process, but also it's really about getting the person properly on board and into the role as quickly as you can. And it starts with the basics, right? So be there on their first day. And again, you might be thinking, of course, but again, we have seen instances where a candidate turns up and the manager is actually on holiday for the week. And so there's been a bit of a diary muck-up and the person sits in the corner for a week and waits for their boss to come back. Or business cards aren't ready, the company car's not ready, the pens at the desk aren't ready, or they need high-vis gear, PPE, boots, and they filled this all out when they did the application form, shoe size and what have you, and the boots aren't there and they won't be ready for another week. And it causes disruption within the workplace. The people that are waiting for this new person to start are frustrated because they can't connect with their new colleague, and the new person is frustrated. They feel like they've actually been forgotten, and now they're creating hassle that wasn't part of their making. So be ready for that first day. The induction process actually starts before they turn up. Get all that stuff organised. So when they arrive on their first day, whatever it is that they need is there and it's ready. Someone is there to welcome them. And the induction process starts with the basics, those kind of office or workplace, factory, warehouse norms, whatever it is. And this is where we have coffee. This is where the toilets are. This is where you go out to smoke if you smoke. This is where, this is how the team CAF works. You know, you go in here and people put their lunch in this fridge. All the real basic stuff that you just take for granted every day. On Fridays we might have beers after work. Whatever it is, this sort of stuff that is part of your life within the business that you often forget about. Then introduce them to people so they know people around you. And then you cover some of the compliance things around policies and expectations, and then you focus on the job. So the task that they need to do and the job they need to perform clearly is part of the induction. But it only takes about half a day, if that, to do all of this other stuff, and that really settles them in really well. And then if your induction plan is structured and you follow it, you will very quickly determine if your recruitment decision was correct. So at this point, candidate and employer are still really sounding each other out. Have I made the right decision to work here? Have we made the right decision hiring this person? And if you have concerns, a good induction program allows you to address those concerns. So it's not just about jumping up at the end of the week and going, oh heck, I've made a bad call, let's sack somebody here. It's actually about going, here's what we need, here's what this person is delivering, there's a gap, I'm going to talk to them about it and explain what we're expecting and explain what we're not getting and give them an opportunity to improve so you don't have to go and re-recruit. And a good induction plan will give you that stuff. It's really, really critical. And as part of that, the final step within that is assign a buddy or mentor. And I know this sounds really cheesy, right? Like and it sounds like a kind of primary school thing, the buddy or whatever you want to call it. But somebody that they can connect with that's not their boss can be incredibly helpful. Just someone who they can go to and have a bit of a chat to about stuff that's a bit outside the kind of formal work environment. It's really, really useful. And again, it helps with that engagement piece. And the buddy or mentor person is someone that can also give you feedback about how it's going. And that's it. So that's a very traditional recruitment process, but what I've tried to do is fill it in with some tips and advice around how to get the most out of it, because this is the process that most people still follow. In future sessions, we'll cover some of the more innovative ways to recruit, some of the apps and softwares that you can use and selection tools you can use. But really, as I said at the start, this is an acknowledgement that this basic process is still followed by most people. And in our experience, these tips will help you get the most out of it. They help you understand the pros and cons of each part and how you can combine them all to determine that you've got the best candidate. So thanks for joining us, and any questions that come in over the next month we'll address next time round. This is recorded and available on our Facebook page, so check it out. It's just MyHR on Facebook. As I said earlier, email me if you've got questions, jason@myhr.co.nz, or call the office on 0800 69 4769. We'd be happy to talk to you. And good luck, happy recruiting. Cheers.